Hi. Are you ready? This is going to be a long one. We're going to begin with chapter 18 and go all the way through the end of the book, chapter 21. That's about 50 pages in the book. So we have a while to go, so sit back, enjoy yourself. You may pause the video at any time. I will put up chapter summaries for 18, 19, 20, and 21. Woo, we actually have 4 chapters. So I'll do those on separate videos or in one long video where all the summaries will be. And then that way you will have them at your disposal. What I really like about the summaries is the analysis at the very end of the summary. So anyway, here we go with chapter 18. In dry clothes, with some hot corn mush and molasses inside her, Kit leaned against the back of the settle and soaked in the warmth of the fire. Light-headed with weariness and relief, she looked around the familiar room. How beautiful and safe it looked, with the sunshine slanting in the window. The regular breathing from Mercy's curtained bed sounded almost normal. Dr. Bulkley had said that Judith might get up this morning. Rachel had consented to go up to her own bed for a short sleep, on their promise to waken her at once if Mercy should rouse, and Matthew was preparing to get back to his work. Watching him draw on his heavy boots, Kit knew that she could not let him go without speaking. All night, just beyond the fringe of her thoughts, through the terror of the hunt and the long cold hours of waiting, she had cherished one small warming memory. There on the beach it had been the one thing that had held her back when Nat had offered her a chance to escape. She had to make sure that this memory was rightfully hers. She got up shakily and went to stand before her uncle. "Uncle Matthew," she said softly, "I heard what you said last night to those people, and I want to thank you for it." "'Tis no matter," he answered gruffly. "But it is a matter," she insisted. "I've been nothing but a trouble to you from the beginning, and I don't deserve your standing up for me." Her uncle studied her from under his bushy eyebrows. "'Tis true. I did not welcome you into my house," he said at last. "But this last week you have proved me wrong. You haven't spared yourself, Catherine. Our own daughter couldn't have done more." Suddenly, Kit wished with all her heart that she had never deceived this man. She would like to stand here before him with a clear conscience. She was ashamed of the many times, more times than she could count, when she had skipped off and left her work undone. "I shall tell him some day," she vowed to herself, "when I am sure that Hannah is safe. And I will do my full share beginning this very moment. I don't even feel tired any more." She helped Judith into her clothes and drew a chair for her near the sunny window. She drew a great kettle of water from the well and set it to boil for the wash. She swept up the scuffed sand and spread a fresh layer in a fine pattern. She stirred up a corn cake for the midday meal. Hannah was safe, and Mercy was going to get well. That should be enough, and surely, if she worked hard enough, she could forget this strange feeling of emptiness, the haunting regret that a secret and lovely thing was gone forever. Matthew came back presently for the noon meal. Kit thrust the iron peel into the oven and threw out the corn cake. Plump and golden and crisp about the edges, and Judith said the smell of it made her feel hungry for the first time. Mercy stirred and asked in a quite natural voice for a sip of water, and Rachel's haggard face lighted with a smile. They were not alarmed this time by the knock on the door. Matthew went to answer it, and the others sat calmly at the table. They heard the scuff of boots in the hallway and a man's voice. "We have business with you, Matthew." "There is illness here," he answered. "This can't wait. Better summon your wife, too, and that girl from Barbados. We'll be brief as we can. The men stood aside to let Rachel and Kit walk ahead into the company room. There were 4 callers, one a deacon from the church, the constable of the town, and Goodman Cruff and his wife. They were not excited this morning. They looked hard and purposeful. The goodwife Cruff's eyes glittered toward Kit with contempt and something else she could not interpret. "I know you don't hold with witchcraft," the constable began, "but we've summat to say as may change your mind." "You arrested your witch?" asked Matthew with impatience. "Not that. The town's ridded that one for good." Matthew stared at him in alarm. "What have you done?" "Not what you fear. We didn't lay hands on the old woman. She slipped through our trap somehow." "And we know how," hissed Goodwife Cruff. Kit felt a wave of fear that left her sick and dizzy. The deacon glanced at Goodwife Cruff uneasily. "I don't quite go along with them," he said, "but I've got to admit the thing looks mighty queer. We've done combed the whole town this morning ever since dawn. There's not a trace of her. Don't see how she could have got far." "We know right enough. They'll never find her," broke in Goodwife Cruff. "No use trying to shush me, Adam Cruff. You tell them what we saw." Her husband cleared his throat. "I didn't rightly see it myself," he apologized, "but there's some as saw that big yellow cat of hers coming a-running out of the house. Couple of fellers took a shot at it, but the ones that's got a good look claims it has a great fat mouse in its mouth, and it never let go even when the bullets came after it." His wife drew a hissing breath. "That mouse was Hannah Tupper. 'Tis not the first time she's changed herself into a creature, they say, when the moon is full." "Now hold on a minute," Matthew cautioned the constable at Matthew's scornful gesture. "You can't gainsay it. There's things happen we better not look at too close. The woman's gone, and I say good riddance." "She's gone straight back to Satan," pronounced Goodwife Cruff, "but she's left another to do her work." Kit could have laughed out loud, but a look at Goodwife Cruff sobered her. The woman's eyes were fastened on her face with a cunning triumph. "They found summat when they searched her place. Better take a look at this, Matthew." The constable drew something shining from his pocket. It was the little silver horn-book. "What is it?" asked Matthew. "Looks like a sort of horn-book." "Who ever saw a horn-book like that?" demanded Goodman Cruff. "'Tis the devil's own writing." "Has the Lord's Prayer on it," the constable reminded him. "Look at the letters on the handle, Matthew." Matthew took the thing in his hands reluctantly and turned it over. "Ask her where it came from," jibed Goodwife Crupp, unable to keep silent. There was a harsh gasp from Rachel. Matthew lifted his eyes from the horn-book to his niece's white face. "Can this be yours, Catherine?" he asked. Kit's lips were stiff. Yes, sir, she answered faintly. Did you know you had lost it? Was it stolen from you? No, sir. I knew it was there. I took it there myself. Why? Kit looked from one grim, waiting face to another. Did they know about Prudence? If not, she must be very careful. It was a sort of present, she said lamely. A present to the widow? Well, not exactly. You mean she had some sort of hold over you? Some blackmail? Oh, no. Hannah was a friend of mine. I'm sorry, Uncle Matthew. I meant to tell you, truly I did, as soon as I could. I used to go see her on the way home from the meadow. Sometimes I took things to her, my own things, I mean. Poor Rachel, how that apple tart must be torturing her conscience. I don't understand this, Catherine. I forbade you. You understood it perfectly, to go to that woman's house. I know, but Hannah needed me, and I needed her. She wasn't a witch, Uncle Matthew. If you could only have known her. Matthew looked back at the constable. I am chagrined, he said with dignity, that I have not controlled my own household. But the girl is young and ignorant. I told myself to blame myself for my laxness. Take no blame to yourself, Matthew. The constable rose to his feet. I'm sorry what with your daughter sick and all, but we've got to lock this girl up. Oh, no, burst out Rachel. You can't let them, Matthew. Since when, asked Matthew, his eyes flashing, do you lock up a girl for disobedience? That is for me to settle. Not disobedience. This girl is charged with witchcraft. That is ridiculous, thundered Matthew. Watch your words, man. The girl has admitted to being friends to the witch, and there is a complaint against her made according to the law and signed. Who dared to sign such a charge? I signed it, shouted Goodman Cruff. The girl put a spell on half the children in this town, and I'll see her brought into court if it's the last thing I ever do. Matthew looked defeated. Where do you aim to take her? He asked. Shed back of my place will do. There's no proper jail short of Hartford, and I've lost nearly a day's work already. Wait a minute. How long do you intend to keep her? Till the trial. When Sam Talcott gets back tomorrow, he'll likely examine her with the ministers present. That's what they did to Goody Harrison and that Johnson woman. Been 20 years since we had a witch case hereabouts. Reckon there'll be a jury trial in Hartford. Suppose I give you my word that until Captain Talcott returns, I'll keep her locked in her room upstairs. What good is his word? Demanded Goodwife Cruff. Has he known where she was these past months? She wants to see me in jail, Kit thought. She felt numbed by the hatred in the woman's eyes. I'd trust you all right, the constable considered, but they's some I don't trust. They was out of their minds down here last night. One more death in this town, and I won't be responsible for what happens. The girl will be safe with me, that I warrant. Rachel started forward, but Matthew motioned her back. Get her coat, he ordered. They stood waiting silently in the hallway while Rachel climbed the stairs, weeping, and came back with her own woolen cloak. Yours feels damp, she quavered. Keep this on you, Kit. It may be cold in that place. The Crufts walked behind them all the way along the High Street, down Carpenter's Lane to the constable's house, and stood by till they saw Kit safely in the shed, and heard with their own ears the heavy bolt drop in place outside the door. The shed was entirely empty, save for a pile of straw in one corner on the dirt floor. There was no window, but the rough boards let in chinks of daylight as well as draughts of cold November air. Kit leaned against the doorpost and let the tears run down her cheeks. Toward late afternoon, when one side of the shed was already deep in shadows, she heard footsteps. The bolt drew back, and the constable's face peered through the door. "Brought some supper," he growled, "and my wife sent this." He thrust toward her a heavy quilt, none too clean even in the dim light, but a gesture of kindness none the less. "We never had a girl in here before," he explained uneasily. "Funny thing, I'd never picked you for a witch, but you can't tell." "Please," Kit ventured, "those other women you spoke of, Goody Harrison and the other, what happened to them?" "Goody Harrison was banished from the colony. They hanged Goody Johnson." Then, seeing the horror that blanched her face, he reconsidered. "I hardly think they'd be so hard on you," he consoled her. "But you're so young in the first offense. More likely brand you or cut off an ear." He slammed the door shut again. Whatever might be in that wooden bowl, she had no heart even to taste it. She had begun to shake again, and the quilt did not warm her. She had never in all her life known the feeling of a locked door. It was all she could do to hold herself from pounding against it and screaming. If she should scream, who would hear her? Who was there anywhere who could help her? John Holbrook, perhaps. In his quiet way he had a sort of strength and conviction. They might have listened to John, but he was far away in the wilderness of Massachusetts. Nat Eaton? He was halfway down the river and banished from town as well. William? Why, of course. William could help her. Why hadn't she thought of him at once? Anything William said would carry weight in the town. His position, his character were unquestioned. Could the magistrate for one moment hold the Cruft's word against a man like William? The thought steadied her. Oops. Come on, page. She thought of him coming to champion her. Confident, unruffled, those wide, dependable shoulders like a fortress between her and the angry face of Goodwife Cruft. Dear, dependable William. Perhaps he would come tonight. Kit drew a deep breath, and sitting on the floor, her knees drawn tight against her chest, she waited for William. It was Rachel who finally came instead. Long after dark, Kit heard her whisper outside the shed wall, so timid and faint at first she thought she must have imagined it. "Kit, can you hear me? Are you all to rights?" "Oh, yes, Aunt Rachel, you shouldn't have left them. I had to know how you are. I knew you'd want to know, Kit. Dr. Bulkley says Mercy's fever is nearly gone." "I'm so glad. I wanted to help, and now I've left it all for you to do. Oh, Aunt Rachel, can you ever forgive me?" "Shh, child. 'Tis myself I can't forgive. To think I knew all along you were going to that place, and I never spoke up." "I'd have kept going anyway, but I never knew I'd shame you all like this. Aunt Rachel, what do they do to witches?" There was a small sound outside the boards. "Nothing, child," whispered Rachel. "They won't do anything to you. We'll think of something." But she had not spoken fast enough. That little sobbing catch of breath had answered first. "The inquiry will be in the morning. Have courage, dear, but you've got to help us, Kit. If there's something you haven't told, something you're holding back, you must tell everything. How much courage must it have taken for Rachel to brave her husband's anger and the dark and the strange terror of a prison shed. "I wish I could get some food into you. Are you very frightened, Kit dear?" "Not now." Kit lied. "Not now that you've come. Thank you, Aunt Rachel." Sustained by her aunt's visit, Kit was able to face the morrow with less panic. She sat down and forced herself to take stock of her chances. She couldn't imagine that they could have much evidence against her, but it didn't seem to take much evidence to rouse these people's suspicions. What had poor Hannah ever done to harm them? Goodwife Cruff had hated her ever since that first day on the Dolphin, and she would never rest now until she had her vengeance. Nobody in the town would have much sympathy for a disobedient girl. If only she could have obeyed her impulse this morning and told her uncle the whole story. Though perhaps he was too helpless, she saw now that she had undermined his authority in all eyes by flouting his orders. Suppose they discovered that Prudence, too, had disobeyed. It did not bear thinking, and she was entirely responsible for Prudence's actions, Kit admitted with a sick heart. Who had inveigled the child with promises, and thought of the hiding place under the willow tree, and persuaded her, no, dragged her, against her will, to meet Hannah? Oh, why hadn't she seen what she was doing? How could she have been so wicked? What difference did it make whether Prudence could read or not, when she was half starved and beaten and overworked? "If I wanted to neglect my own work," Kit groaned in remorse, "I might at least have been out in the Cruffs' field, helping the poor child." And yet how lovely it had been that last afternoon in the cabin. Leaning her forehead on her knees, Kit could almost feel herself there again. She could hear the crackling of the flames, the bubbling of the stew in the kettle, the scratching of the pen in Prudence's fingers, and the creak of Hannah's chair, and the drowsy purring of the yellow cat. She could see the glow of the fire, but she could not feel its warmth. It was like gazing in at a window from the cold outside, at a forbidden room she could never enter again. She had not slept all the night before on the beach. Now, huddled inside the ragged quilt, she was sucked down, in spite of herself, into a black whirlpool of slumber, where nightmare phantoms whirled with her, nearer and nearer, towards some unknown horror. Chapter 19. The sun had been slanting through the chinks in the shed wall for hours when Kit heard the heavy bolt withdrawn and the shed door opened. This time it was the constable's wife with a wooden trencher of mush. In spite of its dubious appearance, it sent a faint curl of steam into the frosty air, and Kit forced herself to take a few spoonfuls while the woman stood watching, hands on her hips. "I'd reckoned you'd be half froze," the woman observed. "To tell the truth, I couldn't sleep half the night thinking of you out there. Out here, 'tis good enough for thieves and drunkards, I say to my man, but 'tis no place for a female, witch or no. I've seen that girl in meeting," I says, "sitting there, decent as you please, and it goes against reason she could be a witch. There's some folks in this town always bent on stirring up trouble." Kit looked up at her gratefully. "'Twas good of you to send the quilt," she said. "How long will they keep me here, do you think?" "My man has orders to take you to the town house in an hour." "So soon?" Kit put down the spoon, her stomach curling. "What will happen there?" "The magistrate and the ministers will examine you. If they think you be guilty, they'll send you on to Hartford to wait trial. At any rate, you'll be cut off. You'll be off our hands. My man and I, we don't relish this work much. We'll be glad when his term is up." Kit laid down the trencher in dismay. "But I can't go like this. I've been sitting in the dirt all night." The face she lifted to the woman was even sorrier than she realized, streaked with mud and tears. "You're no treat to look at, that's sure," the woman admitted. "If they took you for a rich right now, they'd scarce blame them. Wait a minute." She went away, taking the precaution of bolting the door securely, and returned presently with a basin of water and a rough wooden comb. Gratefully, Kit did what she could to make herself respectable. The dress, dirty and crumpled, could not be helped. It required the constable and 2 sturdy members of the watch to conduct the timid witch up Carpenter's Lane, along Broad Street, up Hungry Hill to the townhouse. The small building seemed full of people as she entered. Benches and chairs along the 2 walls were crowded with men from the town, with here and there a sharp-faced woman, cronies of Goodwife Cruff. At a table at the end of the room sat Captain Samuel Talcott, magistrate from Wethersfield to the General Court of Connecticut, and a group of men whom Kit knew as the town's selectmen. Her uncle sat in his place among them, his lips tight, his eyebrows drawn fiercely together. What anguish it must cost him, Kit thought with shame, to have to sit here and pass judgment on a member of his own household. At the opposite end of the table sat the 2 ministers, Reverend John Woolbridge and Dr. Gershom Bulkley, both famed for their relentless sermons against witchcraft. Kit's heart sank. There was no one in the whole room save her uncle who would speak a word in her defense. William had not come. Captain Talcott rapped on the table, and a hush fell over the room. "Good folk, we will proceed at once to the business at hand. We have come here in order to inquire and search into the matter of Mistress Catherine Tyler, lately of Barbados, who is accused by sundry witnesses of the practice of witchcraft. Mistress Tyler will come forward." Prompted by the constable's elbow, Kit got to her feet and moved haltingly across the room to stand facing the magistrate across the table. "You will listen to the charge against you." A clerk read from a parchment, giving full weight and due to every awful word. "Catherine Tyler, thou art here accused, that not having the fear of God before thine eyes, thou hast had familiarity with Satan, the grand enemy of God and man, and that by his instigation and help thou hast in a preternatural way afflicted and done harm to the bodies and estates of sundry of his Majesty's subjects in the 3rd year of his Majesty's reign, for which, by the law of God and the law of the colony, thou deservest to die." There was a murmur along the benches. Kit's hands felt icy, but she kept her eyes steadily on the magistrate. "Mistress Tyler, you are accused by Adam Cruff with the following actions. Firstly, that you were the familiar friend and companion of the widow Hannah Tupper of Blackbird Pond, an alleged witch who has within the past week disappeared in a suspicious manner. Such friendship is a lawful test of guilt, inasmuch as it is well known that witchcraft is an art that may be learned and conveyed from one person to another, and that it is often fallen out that a witch, upon dying, leaveth some heir to her witchcraft. Secondly, that you are guilty of actions and works which infer accord with the devil, which have caused illness and death to fall upon many innocent children in this town." The clerk sat down. Captain Talcott eyed the girl before him. Quite plainly, he had a distaste for the duty at hand, but his stern, soldierly countenance did not soften. "Mistress Tyler," he said, "you've heard the complaints against you. We will proceed with the first accusation. Is it true that you were a friend and companion of the widow Tupper?" For a moment Kit feared that her voice would not come. "Yes, sir," Kit managed shakily. "Is it true that on sundry occasions during the summer you have entered her house and visited with her?" "Yes, sir." "Is it true that you were also acquainted with a certain cat which the widow entertained as a familiar spirit?" It was just an ordinary cat, sir, like any cat." "You will answer yes or no. Is it true that you have engaged with the widow Tupper in various enchantments with the direct intent of causing mischief to certain people?" "Oh, no, sir. I don't know what you mean by enchantments." "Do you deny that on a certain day in August last, on passing the pasture of Goodman Whittlesey, you cast a spell upon his cattle so that they were rooted to the ground where they stood, and refused to answer his call or to give any milk on that evening?" I don't understand, sir. How could I do such a thing?" "Goodman Whittlesey, will you repeat your complaint for this assembly?" Her head reeling, Kit stood helpless as one after the other they rose and made their complaints, these men and women whom she scarcely recognized. The evidence rolled against her like a dark wave. One man's child had cried aloud all night that someone was sticking pins into him. Another child had seen a dark creature with horns at the foot of her bed. A woman who lived along South Road testified that one morning Kit had stopped and spoken to her child, and that within 10 minutes the child had fallen into a fit and lain ill for 5 days. Another woman testified that one afternoon last September she had been sitting in the window sewing a jacket for her husband when she had looked up and seen Kit walking past her house, staring up at the window in a strange manner. Whereupon, try as she would, the sleeve would never set right in the jacket. A man swore he had seen Kit and Goody Tupper dance round a fire in the meadow one moonlit night, and that a great black man, taller than an Indian, had suddenly appeared from nowhere and joined in the dance. Matthew Wood leaped suddenly to his feet. "I protest this mockery," he roared in a voice that silenced every whisper. Not one word of this nonsense could be proved in the court of assistance. There is not one shred of lawful evidence in the lot. I beg you, Sam Talcott, make an end of it. Do I infer that you are willing to vouch for your niece's good character, Matthew Wood? Certainly, I will vouch for it. We are to understand, then, that these visits to the widow Tupper were taken with your approval? Taken aback, Matthew glared at the magistrate. No, I had no knowledge of them, he admitted. Did you ever, at any time, indicate to your niece that she was not to associate with this woman?" "Yes, I forbade her to go." "Then the girl has been disobedient and deceitful." Matthew clenched his fists in frustration. "The girl has been thoughtless and headstrong at times, but her upbringing has been such as to encourage that." "You admit, then, that her education has been irregular?" "You can twist what I say as you will, Sam Talcott," said Matthew in steely anger, "but I swear before all present, on my word as a free man of the colony, that this girl is no witch." "We are obliged to listen to the testimony, Matthew," said Captain Talcott reasonably. "I will thank you to keep silent. What is your opinion of the case, Dr. Bulkley?" Dr. Bulkley cleared his throat. "In my opinion," he said deliberately, "it is necessary to use the greatest caution in the matter of testimony. Since the unnatural events so far recounted appear to rest in each case upon the word of but one witness, the legality of any one of them is open to question." "It is ridiculous to talk of legality," interrupted Matthew. "There has not one word been spoken that makes sense." For the last few moments Goodwife Cruff had been vehemently prodding her husband. He rose now obediently. "Sir, I've summat to say as makes sense," he announced, assuming a bold tone, "and there's more than one witness to prove it. I've got summat as was found in the widow's house that night." With a sinking heart, Kit watched as he drew an object from his pocket. It was not the horn book as she expected. It was the little copybook. At sight of it, Goodwife Cruff's anger burst through all restraints. "Look at that!" she demanded. "What do you say about that? My Prudence's name, written over and over. 'Tis a spell, that's what it is. A mercy the child is alive today. Another hour and she'd have been dying like all the others." The magistrate accepted the copybook reluctantly, and thought it were tainted, as though it were tainted. "Do you recognize this book, Mistress Tyler?" Kit could barely stand upright. She tried to answer, but only a hoarse whisper came out. "Speak up, girl," he ordered sharply. "Does this book belong to you?" "Yes, sir," she managed. "Did you write this name?" Kit could barely swallow. She had vowed she would never deceive her uncle again. Then, remembering, she looked back at the copybook. Yes, the name on the first line was in her own hand, large and clear for Prudence to copy. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice loud with relief. "I wrote the name." Matthew Wood passed a hand over his eyes. He looked old and ill as he had looked that day beside Mercy's bed. "Why should you write a child's name over and over like that?" I can't tell you, sir." Captain Talcott looked perplexed. "There are no other children's names here," he said. "Why did you choose to write the name of Prudence Cruff?" Kit was silent. "Mistress Tyler," the magistrate spoke to her directly, "I had considered this morning's inquiry merely a formality. I did not expect to find any evidence worthy of carrying to the court, but this is a serious matter. You must explain to us how this child's name came to be written." As Kit looked back at him mutely, the restraints that held the tensely waiting crowd gave way. Men and women leaped to their feet, screaming, "She won't answer! That proves she's guilty! She's a witch! She's as good as admitted it! We don't need a jury trial! Put her to the water test! Hanging's too good for her!" In the midst of the pandemonium, Gershom Bulkley quietly reached for the copybook, studied it carefully, and turned a shrewd, deliberative eye upon Kit. Then he whispered something to the magistrate. Captain Talcott nodded. "Silence," he barked. "This is the colony of Connecticut. Every man and woman is entitled to a trial before a jury. This case will be turned over to the General Session in Hartford. The inquiry is dismissed." "Hold a minute, Captain," called a voice. A commotion near the door had been scarcely noticed. "There's a fellow here says he has an important witness for the case." Every voice was suddenly stilled. Almost paralyzed with dread, Kit turned slowly to face the new accuser. On the threshold of the room stood Nat Eaton, slim, straight-shouldered, without a trace of mockery in his level blue eyes. "Nat!" The wave of joy and relief was so unexpected that she almost lost her balance, but almost instantly it drained away and left a new fear, for she saw that beside him, clinging tightly to his hand, was Prudence Cruff. Goodwife Cruff let out a piercing scream. "Take her out of here! The witch will put an evil eye on her!" She and her husband both started forward. "Stand back," ordered the magistrate. "The child is protected here. Where is the witness?" Nat put his hands on the child's shoulders and gently urged her forward. With one trusting look up at his face, Prudence walked steadily toward the magistrate's table. Suddenly, Kit found her voice. "Oh, please, sir," she cried, the tears rushing down her face. "Let them take her away. It is all my fault. I would do anything to undo it if I could. I never meant any harm, but I'm responsible for all of it. Please take me to Hartford. Do what you want with me, but oh, I beg you, send Prudence away from this horrible place." The magistrate waited till this outburst was over. "'Tis a trifle late to think about the child," he said coldly. "Come here, child." Kit sank on her knees and buried her face in her hands. The buzz in the room roared like a swarm of bees around her head. Then there was a waiting hush. She could scarcely bear to look at Prudence, but she forced herself to raise her head. The child was barefoot, and her snarled hair was uncovered. Her thin arms under the skimpy jumper were blue with cold. Then Kit stared again. There was something strange about Prudence. "Will you stand there, child, in front of the table?" Captain Talcott spoke reassuringly. Watching Prudence, Kit suddenly felt a queer prickling along her spine. There was something different about her. The child's head was up. Her eyes were fastened levelly on the magistrate. Prudence was not afraid. "We will ask you some questions, Prudence," said the magistrate quietly. "You will answer them as truthfully as you possibly can. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," whispered Prudence. "Do you know this young woman?" "Oh, yes, sir. She is my teacher. She taught me to read." "You mean at the dame school?" "No, I never went to the dame school." "Then where did she teach you?" "At Hannah's house in the meadow." A loud scream from Goodwife Cruft tore across the room. "You mean Mistress Tyler took you to Hannah Tupper's house?" "The first time she took me there. After that, I went by myself." "The little weasel!" cried Goodwife Cruft. "That's where she was all those days. I'll see that girl along." "It is all over," thought Kit, with a wave of faintness. Gershom Bulkley still held the little copybook. He spoke now under his breath, and passed the book to Captain Talcott. "Have you ever seen this book before?" the magistrate questioned. "Oh, yes, sir. Kit gave it to me. I wrote my name in it." "That's a lie!" cried Goodwife Cruft. "The child is bewitched." Captain Talcott turned to Kit. "Is it true," he asked her, "that the child wrote her own name in this book?" Kit dragged herself to her feet. "'Tis true," she answered dully. "I wrote it for her once. Then she copied it." "You can't take her word for anything, sir," protested Goodman Cruft timidly. "The child don't know what she's saying. I mean, might as well tell it. Prudence has never been what you call bright. She never could learn much." The magistrate paid no attention. "Could you write your name again, do you think?" I think so, sir." He dipped the quill pen carefully in the ink and handed it to the child. Leaning over the table, Prudence set the pen on the copybook. For a moment there was not a single sound in the room but the hesitant scratching. Goodman Cruft was on his feet, propelled by a curiosity greater than an awe for the magistrate. He came slowly across the room and peered over his child's shoulder. "Is that proper writing?" he demanded in unbelief. "Prudence Cruft, does it say? Right out as it should?" The magistrate glanced at the writing and handed the copybook to Gershom Bulkley. "Very proper writing, I should say," Dr. Bulkley commented, "for a child with no learning." The magistrate leaned to take the pen out of the small fingers. Goodman Cruft tiptoed back to the bench. The bluster was gone from him. He looked dazed. "Now, Prudence," the magistrate continued, "you say that Mistress Tyler taught you to read?" "What sort of reading?" Goodwife Cruft rose in a frenzy. "Magic signs and spells, I tell you. The child would never know the difference." Gershom Bulkley rose to his feet. "That, at least, will be easy to prove," he suggested reasonably. "What can you read, child?" "I can read the Bible." Dr. Bulkley picked up the great Bible from the table and turned the pages thoughtfully. Then, moving to hand the book to Prudence, he realized that it was too heavy for her to hold, and laid it carefully on the table beside her. "Read that for us, child, beginning right there." Kit held her breath. Was it the tick of the great clock that sounded so frightening, or her own heart? Then across the silence came a whisper. "Buy the truth and sell it not. Also wisdom and in instruction and understanding." The childish voice slowly gained strength and clarity till it reached every corner of the room. "The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wish child shall have joy of him. thy father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. In the warm rush of pride that welled up in her, Kit forgot her fear. For the first time she dared to look back at Nat Eaton, where he stood near the door. Across the room their eyes met, and suddenly it was as though he had thrown a line straight into her reaching hands. She could feel the pull of it, and over its taut span strength flowed into her, warm and sustaining. When finally she looked away, she realized that everyone in the room was staring at the two parents. They had both leaned forward, their mouths opened in shock and unbelief. As she listened, Goodwife Cruft's face darkened and her eyes narrowed. She saw now that she had been tricked. The fresh anger that was gathering would be vented on her child. On the father's face a new emotion seemed to be struggling. As the thin voice ended, Goodwife Cruft drew in her breath through her teeth in a venomous hiss. But before she could release it, her husband sprang forward. "Did you hear that?" he demanded widely of everyone present. All at once his shoulders straightened. "That was real good reading. I'd like to see any boy in this town do better." "It's a trick," denied his wife. "That child could never read a word in her life. She's bewitched, I tell you." "Hold your tongue, woman," shouted her husband unexpectedly. "I'm sick and tired of hearing about Prudence being bewitched. All these years you've been telling me our child was half-witted. Why, she's smart as a whip. I bet it warn't much of a trick to teach her to read." Goodwife Cruft's jaw dropped. For one moment she was struck utterly dumb, and in that moment her husband stepped into his rightful place. There was a new authority in his voice. "All my life I've wished I could read. If I'd had a son, I'd have seen to it he learned his letters. Well, this is a new country over here, and who says it may not be just as needful for a woman to read as a man? Might give her summat to think about besides witches and foolishness. At any rate, I got someone now to read the good book to me of an evening, and if that's the work of the devil, then I say 'tis a mighty queer thing for the devil to go working against himself." The magistrate had not interrupted his speech. There was a glint of amusement in his eye as he asked, "I take it then, Goodman Cruft, that you withdraw your charges against this young woman?" "Yes," he answered loudly. "Yes, I withdraw the charges." "Adam Cruft!" His wife had found her voice. "Have you lost your senses? The girl has bewitched you too." In the back of the room someone tittered. A man's laugh rang out. Was it Nat's? All at once, like a clap of thunder, the tension of the room broke into laughter that shook the timbers and rattled the windows. Every man in the room was secretly applauding Adam Cruft's declaration of independence. Even the magistrate's stern lips twisted slightly. "There seems to be no evidence of witchcraft," he announced when order had been restored. "The girl has admitted her wrong in encouraging a child to willful disobedience. Beyond that, I cannot see there is any reasonable charge against her. I pronounce that Mistress Catherine Tyler is free and innocent." But suddenly Goodwife Cruft's anger found a new outlet. "That man!" she shrilled. "Isn't he the seaman? The one who was banished for setting fire to the houses? 30 lashes they promised to him if he showed his face here again." There was a renewed uproar. The constable looked to the magistrate for orders. Captain Talcott hesitated, then shrugged his shoulders. Arrest him. The sentence still stands. Oh, no, Kit pleaded in alarm. You can't arrest him when he only came back to help me. With a shrewd look at his niece, Matthew Wood interceded for her. "'Tis the truth, Sam," he observed. "The lad risked the penalty to see justice done. I suggest you remit the sentence." "A good suggestion," agreed the magistrate, relieved to have an end of the matter. But Nat had slipped out of the room, and his half-hearted pursuers reported not a single trace of him. "They won't find him," a voice whispered in Kit's ear. A small hand crept into hers. "He's got a fast little pinnace hidden on the river bank. He told me to say good-bye to you if he had to hurry away." "Prudence!" Kit's knees had suddenly turned to water. How did it all happen?" "He came and found me this morning. He said he got worrying about you and came back and sort of spied round till he heard about the meeting. He said I was the only one who could save you, and he promised he would stay right here and help as long as we needed him." "I am so grateful to both of you." Kit's tears started again. "And I'm so proud of you, Prudence. Will you be all right, do you think?" "She'll be all right," Goodman Cruff, coming to claim his daughter, had overheard. "Time somebody looked after her so she won't need to run off any more. Next summer she'll go to your school like I always wanted." "Goodwife Cruff," the magistrate called back the departing woman, "I remind you that the penalty for slander is heavy. A fine of £30 or 3 hours in the stocks. Mistress Tyler would be within her rights to press her own charges." "Oh, no," gasped Kit. Matthew Wood stood by her. "Let us make an end of this," he said. "We have no desire to press charges. With your permission, Captain, I shall take Catherine home." She made it through the trial. We're coming toward the end here, and as you can see, the daylight is waning a bit. So let us continue on. I think if you will give me just 1 second, we're almost done. I seriously was crying. I seriously was crying. 1 second, let me turn my lamp on. I'll be right back. In the minute, you can, I guess, watch the cat sleeping. He's a good kitty cat. If I could pause, I would. 1 second. Roswell, sleeping. Sweet kitty cat. Okay, we are back. Ah, goodness. This is such a good book. Now I remember why I loved it so when I was younger. You know, when you read the title, you think, about witches? Not so. Okay, here we go. Chapter 20. The day of the first snowfall, Mercy got out of bed. Judith, venturing outside as far as the well, came back, her cheeks glowing with bits of feathery white clinging to her cloak and her dark curls. "'Tis snowing," she announced. "Snowing!" Mercy struggled up on one elbow, her voice eager. "Come, let me touch it, Judith." Judith drew near the bed and held out her sleeve. The flecks of white vanished under Mercy's reverent fingertips. "I must see it," Mercy insisted. "Just for a moment, Mother. I can't miss the first snowfall." It took much preparation, as though for a long journey. 2 pairs of knitted wool stockings between her feet and the cold boards, the blue shawl wrapped securely about her ears, and a heavy quilt swaddled around her from head to foot. They formed a little procession, Rachel and Judith supporting the invalid at each elbow, and Kit following behind to hold up the trailing ends of the quilt from the sanded floor. Very slowly they crossed the room to the front window, and Mercy sat weakly into a chair and rested her chin against the window frame. Outside, the gray afternoon was speckled with drifting white. Already a thin, powdery dusting had gathered in the wagon ruts of the road. The flakes fell softly, vanishing in the heaps of brown leaves, swirling in little smoky coils. "I love the first snowfall better than anything in the world," sighed Mercy, her eyes worshipful. "I can't imagine why," said Judith practically. "It means you can scarcely step foot out the door again till spring." "I know, but 'tis so beautiful, and it makes the house seem so warm and safe. To think that Kit has never seen snow before. Go to the door, Kit, and feel it for me." Kit went obediently to the door and stepped outside. The white flakes made a queer sort of confusion before her eyes. They brushed her cheeks like tiny flower petals and caught on her eyelashes. For a moment her heart lifted with a trace of Mercy's excitement. Then the cold dampness soaked through her thin slippers, and she shivered. "I'm not sure I like it," she thought. "It's curious and lovely in a way, but it makes everything so dark, and somehow it makes me feel shut off." Somewhere far beyond this endless curtain of white, green leaves and flowers were growing under a bright, warm sun. Would she ever see them again? Next morning her dark fears were swept away in a rush of wonder. Under a cloudless blue sky stretched a breathtaking, glittering universe carved of dazzling white coral, unreal and silent. Every familiar sign was altered. There was no trace of life or motion. It was as though no eye but hers had ever looked out upon this purity and perfection. Then, as she looked, a living thing dared to intrude upon this untouched wilderness. Through the white carven carpet that had been High Street pushed 4 oxen, buried up to their middles, dragging behind them a heavy plow. Snow fell away from the great blade in a gigantic wave. "They are breaking out the road," explained Judith. "Now we will be able to get to the lecture." That evening, for the first time since Kit's arrest, William came to call. He had stayed away, he explained, out of consideration for the illness in the house. He inquired courteously after Mercy's health, and she smiled at him from the bed where she sat, propped against the feather pillows. Rachel fluttered to draw a chair for him. On the opposite side of the hearth, Kit was intent on her spinning. She had taken over Mercy's flax wheel and was slowly mastering the art of winding a fine uniform thread. It took concentration and a steady hand. Now the humming of the wheel barely slackened as she raised her eyes for one grave, cool look. William's eyes flickered away toward the leaping flames. It was Judith who kept the conversation going. She had fiercely resented her enforced absence from church and lectures. Now she demanded to know everything that had happened, which of her friends were up and about, when there might be a sleighing party. "I hope John gets back soon," she sighed, "thankful Peabody's wedding is to be in December, and I can't bear it if he isn't here for that. They say in the town that there's been no word from the detachment since they stopped at Hadley. There's been new Indian raids up Deerfield way." Judith dropped her knitting and stared at William. Mercy leaned her head back against the pillows and closed her eyes. Aunt Rachel sprang to her feet in alarm. "I'm surprised at you for spreading rumors, William," she reproved him. "They say no news is good news. Now, 'tis way past Mercy's bedtime. She looks white as a ghost." She hesitated. "Kit, you and William can lay a fire in the company room if you like." Kit did not look up from her spinning. "'Twould take a monstrous lot of wood to heat the room before midnight," she observed. William took the hint and pulled on his heavy beaver fur coat and cap. Kit would not have risen from her place at all, but Rachel, with a meaningful nudge, handed her a candle, and she had perforce to see her suitor to the door. In the hallway, William did not seem disposed to hurry. He lingered so long that Kit was forced to shut the door behind him to keep the chilling draught from the kitchen. "I've missed you, Kit," said William finally. "I had to come back." Kit said nothing. "You don't seem very pleased to see me." How could a girl say that there had been a time when she had longed with all her heart to see him? Besides, there was something more on William's mind. "I don't want you to think that I hold anything against you, Kit," he said awkwardly. "Everyone knows that you meant well. They are all saying in the town what a help you have been to your aunt inside these past weeks. You'll find when you come back, I promise you, Kit, that everyone is willing to let bygones be bygones, and you can make a fresh start." Kit looked down at the tip of William's great boot. "What do you mean by a fresh start?" she asked quietly. "I mean that it is well over. The widow Tupper is gone, and it won't be necessary to see much of the Cruft child. Don't you agree, Kit, that from now on it would be wise to use a little more judgment about people? Mind you, I'm not speaking against charity," he went on, seeing her mouth opening to protest. "We're supposed to care for the poor, but you overdo it, Kit." "But it wasn't charity," Kit burst out. "Hannah and Prudence, they are my friends." "That's just what I mean. We're judged by the company we keep. And in our position, people look to us for an example of what is right and proper. And I'm to set an example by turning my back on my friends?" Kit's eyes glittered. "Oh, Kit," pleaded William miserably, "I didn't want to quarrel with you tonight, but try to see it from my side. It would make a man uneasy, never knowing what his wife would do next." "'Twould make a wife uneasy, never knowing whether she could depend on her husband," Kit answered levelly. William had the grace to flush, but he had held stubbornly to his position. A month ago Kit's temper would have flared, but all at once she realized that William could not really anger her. She had had a long time to think, that night on the river bank, and the longer the night in the constable's shed. She had never consciously made any decision, but suddenly there it was, waiting and unmistakable. "'Tis no use, William," she said now. "You and I would always be uneasy. all of our lives. We would always be hoping for the other one to be different, and always being disappointed when it didn't happen. No matter how hard I tried, I know I could never care about the things that seem so important to you." "The house isn't important to you?" he asked slowly. "Yes, in a way it is," she admitted. "I'd like to live in a fine house, but not if it means I have to be an example. Not if it means I can't choose my own friends." William, too, had been doing some thinking. He did not seem surprised, only gravely regretful. "Perhaps you're right, Kit," he conceded. "I've hoped all this year that you would forget your odd ways and learn to fit in here." "If I thought you would just try—" She shook her head. "Then I won't be coming again." "'Tis no use, William," she repeated. At the door he turned and looked back, his face baffled and unhappy. There was in his eyes just the merest flicker of the look she had seen on there that first morning outside the meeting-house. In that instant Kit knew that she had only speak one word or to stretch out her hand, but she did not speak, and presently William opened the door and was gone. Now the long evenings about the hearth were seldom relieved by any visitor. For hours on end the whir of the spinning wheel and the twang of the loom were the only sounds, except for a formal bow of greeting on Sabbath morning and on lecture day. Kit did not see William again till the day of Thankful Peabody's wedding. Thankful's wedding was the first festivity Wethersfield had enjoyed since the sickness. Through drifts of snow, waist high, by sleigh and sled and snowshoe, young people and old folks and children gathered in the spacious Peabody house, relieved to shake off the labor and anxiety of the past weeks and to rejoice with the happy couple. The feast spread out on the board would be talked of for weeks to come. There were apple and mince and dried berry pies, little spice cakes with maple sugar, frosting, candied fruits and nuts, pitchers of sweet apple cider, and great mugs of steaming flip for the men. 7 different kinds of cake, Judith counted surreptitiously. "I'll never be able to have anything half so grand at my wedding." Kit scarcely heard her. She was remembering the last wedding she had attended. Could it be only a year ago? In Barbados. She could shut her eyes and see the long damask-covered table, set with gold and silver plate. The banquet had lasted for 4 hours. Light from crystal chandeliers had twinkled back from gold braid and jewels. Deep windows had opened out on curved formal gardens, and the sea breezes had filled the room with the scent of flowers. An almost intolerable loneliness wrapped Kit away from the joyous crowd. She was filled with a restlessness she could not understand. What was it that plagued her with this longing to turn back? Was it that far-off memory of elegance and beauty, or was it just the look in Thankful's eyes as she stood, radiant in her rose-colored lute-string wedding dress, and listened to the toasts to her future? Kit and Judith, each lost in her own thoughts, stood together near the wall, unable to join in the merrymaking. From across the room William watched them gravely, making no move. When the bride and groom had driven off in their sleigh toward the snug new house that awaited them, the guests turned back to the laden tables. 2 fiddlers in the corner scraped a lively tune, and some of the more daring young people began to dance. No one paid attention to the 2 tardy guests who appeared at the door, letting in a gust of wind, till suddenly a woman screamed and threw her arms about a snow-covered figure. Then abruptly the music stopped, and the laughter was checked, and everyone crowded around the newcomers. They were 2 Wethersfield men returned from Massachusetts with the detachment of militia. The story they had to tell put a somber end to the happy evening. Of the detachment of 20, only 8 had come back to Hartford. Just south of Hadley, before they could reach Deerfield, they had been ambushed by Indians, who attacked savagely with both arrows and French rifles. 4 men had been killed outright, and 2 others had died of wounds on the trail home. The rest had been surrounded and taken captive. For a few days the survivors had attempted to follow the Indians, till a heavy snow had made it impossible to go on. They had found the scalped body of one of the captives lying by the trail, and they had little hope that in that weather any of the prisoners would have been spared. They had turned back and made their way on snowshoes, barely reaching Hadley before another blizzard set in. The sobered guests crowded close, waiting for one answer. No, none of the Wethersfield men had been killed, but one of the captives was that young fellow who had been studying with the doctor, John Holbrook. In the mingled relief and horror, few of them noticed the faint wail that came from Judith, or saw her waver and fall. Kit and Rachel sprang forward, but it was William who reached her first and carried her gently to the settle by the fire, and it was William who later tucked her carefully into his sleigh and drove her home. In the weeks that followed, watching Judith, Kit began to understand how the gray shadow that was her Aunt Rachel could once have been the toast of an army. Hopelessness had erased the color and animation from Judith's face and set her lovely features into a still mask. Kit ached for her, but even more she was torn with pity for Mercy, whose grief could not find an outlet in a tear or word. Would Mercy's scant strength be equal to this burden? Rachel worried that her daughter did not gain, and fussed over the fire concocting nourishing stews with Mercy obediently trying to swallow. In some contradictory way, grief seemed to have etched on Mercy's thin face a beauty it had never possessed. Behind the clear gray eyes the light still burned steadily. Should I tell her? Kit wondered. Surely now Mercy has a right to know that John loved her. But watching Mercy's stillness, she found a new patience to resist her own impulse. Some day the time would come when Mercy could know. The Christmas season passed, unmarked by any rejoicing. There was no holiday in this Puritan town, no feasting, no gifts. The day went by like any other, filled with work, and Kit said nothing, ashamed that in this somber household she should even remember a happy English Yuletide. January dragged by, and February. It was the hardest winter most of the townspeople could remember. Old people shook their heads, recalling blizzards of their childhood, but it was impossible for Kit to visualize anything more bleak than this first winter of her experience. She no longer saw any beauty in a world muffled in white. She hated the long days of imprisonment when there was nothing to see through the window but shifting curtains of pale gray, when drifts stood waist-high on the doorstep, and it took hours of back-breaking labor to carve a passage to the well. She hated the drafty floors and frigid corners and the perpetual animal reek of heavy clothes hung about the fireplace to dry. Every night she shrank from the moment when she and Judith must make the dread ascent to the upstairs chamber with only the meager comfort of a warming pan. But impatient as she was with the long days indoors, the outdoors promised only aching misery. She resented the arduous preparation for the journey to meeting, the heavy leather boots, the knit socks drawn over them, the clumsy little foot stove they had to lug all the way that cooled off long before the sermon was finished and left one to sit with stinging fingers and toes. while the breath of the whole congregation rose like the smoke from so many pipes. How could Hannah ever have endured it? Kit often shivered alone in that cabin with the wind howling outside, and no one to speak to for weeks on end but the cat and the goats. She hoped there was a cozy hearth at Nat's grandmother's house, and her own heart warmed at the thought of the two old ladies sharing it together. Then her restless thoughts would drift after the dolphin. Nat had offered to take her with him. Suppose she had accepted his offer. If she had never come back, would anyone here in this house really have cared very much? By now she would have been in Barbados. At this very moment she might be. The broom in her hand or the trindle under her foot would idle to a stop as she walked in imagination up the wide drive to her grandfather's house and stepped up to the long shady veranda. Then she would shake herself free. Such daydreaming was a weakness. The house was sold, and she was here in New England, and perhaps Nat had never really meant his offer at all. One night she woke from a vivid dream. She and Nat had stood side by side at the bow of the Dolphin, watching that familiar curving prow carving gently through the calm turquoise water. They came soundlessly into a palm-studded harbor, fragrant with the scent of blossoms, and happiness was like sunshine, wrapping her round and pouring into her heart till it overflowed. She woke in the freezing darkness. "I want to go back," she admitted at last, weeping. "I want to go home, where green things are growing, and I will never see snow again as long as I live." Her tears, scalding her eyelids, froze instantly against the pillow. Lying tense beside Judith, she made a resolve. After that, all through the cheerless day, she hugged the dream close. Sometimes, driven by her restlessness, she would talk about Barbados to Mercy. "Ruts, when I was quite small," she would say over the hum of the flax wheel, "my grandfather took me to see a great cave. You had to go to it when the tide was very low, and when a wave dashed across the rocks, it made a sort of curtain across the opening of the cave. But inside it was very calm and still, and the water on the floor was as clear as glass. Underneath the water there was a sort of garden made of colored rocks, and all over the roof of the cave there were queer hanging shapes, like those icicles outside the window, only pale green and orange and rose-colored. It was so beautiful, Mercy." Mercy would look across at Kit's wistful face and smile in understanding. "She knows," Kit thought. "When I tell them that my mind is made up, she will not try to keep me. She will be sorry, I think, but truly, won't they, all of them, be a little relieved?" In all honesty, she often argued, wouldn't she help the family most by leaving? Did the help she managed to give her aunt and uncle ever begin to make up for their trouble, and for the inescapable fact that she was another person to feed and clothe? Though no one ever so much as hinted at it, the grim truth was that there was a short time ago 2 girls had been well provided for. There was now every likelihood of 3 spinsters in the Wood household. No, she admitted, Judith would never be a spinster. Kit had watched William's face in the meeting, and she knew that he was only biding his time. And Judith, in spite of her downcast eyes, was well aware of this. By every right of beauty and accomplishment, Judith belonged in the new house on Broad Street. In their secret hearts, all 3 of them, she and William and Judith, had really known that all along. It needed only time now to bring about the match, which Kit and John Holbrook had interrupted. In March, a fresh blizzard buried the town in drifts. The long days wore on, one as like another as the endless threads of the loom. Though the bitter cold did not abate, the daylight hours grew perceptibly longer. They lighted the candles a bit later every afternoon. Judith had just set the brass candlestick on the table one late afternoon, and the girls were moving the table nearer to the hearth in preparation for supper, when, A knock sounded at the door. "See who it is, Kit," said Rachel absently. "I don't think I want to take my hands out of this flour." Kit went into the hallway, leaving the kitchen door open behind her, drew back the bolt, and opened the door. A gaunt, ragged figure stood on the step, and as she shrank back, a man pushed his way through the door and halted on the kitchen threshold. Judith suddenly let fall a wooden bowl with a clatter. Rachel, wiping her hands on her apron, came forward, peering in the dim light. "Can it be John?" she breathed tremulously. The man did not even hear her. His eyes had gone straight to Mercy, where she sat by the hearth, and her own eyes stared back, enormous in her white face. Then, with a hoarse, wordless sigh, John Holbrook stumbled across the room and went down on his knees with his head in Mercy's lap. Okay, that is the end of chapter 20. It is time to stop here. So, the next video tomorrow will be the end, chapter 21. God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and grant you peace. Until tomorrow, bye.